It is 4 o'clock. I'd like to go ahead and call this July 12th meeting of the Salina City Commission to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Peck.
Here.
Commissioner Angel.
Here.
Commissioner Arpke.
Here.
Commissioner Jennings.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. It's now time for the Citizens Open Forum, this time set aside for any citizen to come up and make any comments or have any questions that they'd like to bring before the Commission. Okay, there are no awards or proclamations today. We'll move on to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time.
Item 5.1, public hearing on petition number 4328, requesting the vacation of a right-of-way in the Country Club Heights addition.
Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This was written with the understanding received from the petitioner that the July 12th hearing date would not work in terms of his schedule, and so we had written this with a request that the public hearing be held as advertised on the 12th and then continued to the 19th. We do have feedback from franchise and public utility providers. They're at this point expressing concerns about the vacation, but I think those could be eliminated if the option was presented to them of maintaining a easement instead of a right-of-way that would still allow their utilities to remain. But at this point, I think it would still be our recommendation for continuance of the hearing to the 19th so that we could get the official position of the Graveses across the street and the written confirmation about the position of all the affected utilities. But with that, I'd be open to any questions you have about the petition.
Questions?
Part of the reason for this abbreviated report is that in our continued research, I'm now up to 4 previous petitions that were filed on this section of street, and we're also trying to just piece together what has actually occurred and not occurred in the way of petitions here. But this is a street where it's very unlikely that will ever be continued on, and so it's just a question of what's the best means for terminating the street.
Okay. I see Mr. Williams is here. Is there any comments that you'd like to make today, or is okay? All right, Greg, just a motion to move this to the 19th then, or
that would be fine.
okay?
Yeah, is that what you had in mind, Mr.
Yes,
Andrew?
we'll have a much more detailed report and many more drawings and some aerial photos at that meeting, but it was our understanding that this particular date didn't work, so we apologize.
Thank you. Accept a motion.
Mayor, I move that we move this public hearing for next week's meeting on July the 19th.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we postpone this public hearing, ordinance number 10-10559, until next week on the 19th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of June 28th, 2010. Item 6.2, authorize a West Star Energy consent agreement for the Magnolia Commons infrastructure improvements, project number 082733. Item 6.3, approve change order number 1 for the water treatment plant softening basins rehabilitation, project number 092779.
Is there any item that a commissioner would like to see removed from the consent agenda? If not, I'll accept a motion.
Mayor, I make a motion we approve the consent agenda.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. Moving on to development business.
Item 7.1, adoption of the International Building Code, International Residential Code, Uniform Plumbing Code, Uniform Mechanical Code, National Electric Code, and then International Fire Code.
Mr. Hobby.
Mr. Mayor and City Commissioners, this may be an extended meeting by the time we read all these code changes to you.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Actually, what we'd like to do is present to you the amended codes for 2006 as provided the Building Advisory Board the last few months. There are many people from our community got together to discuss these building codes. We started out with the Building Advisory Board and the Plumbing, Mechanical, Electrical Code meetings and discussed the electrical code. So actually no subcommittee was set up for the National Electric Code, as we did 7 actual Plumbing, Mechanical, Electrical Board meetings for that. After that, we set up specific subcommittee meetings for each one of the codes that you see in front of you. Each one of the codes subcommittees had 4 members from the Building Advisory Board. We sent out invitations to all the contractors that would be affiliated with that specific code, whether it be a mechanical code or a mechanical engineer or a residential code to be contractors who work in the residential construction area. We sent out over 350 notices to contractors that they could come in and sit at the subcommittee meetings. We went through each one of the codes of the books that you see in front of you, and each individual subcommittee then discussed the changes that were changed in the 2003 and whether we wanted to bring those codes over to the 2006. So many of those amendments that were done were completed in the 2003 code were brought over to the 2006 code. And also in your meeting notes that you have kind of a layout of how many changes and how many amendments that we have in our codes that would actually fit the building trades people in our community. The fact that we have changed many of our codes to fit building trade construction practices is a model of what I see as very unusual in the state of Kansas. There are some cities that have some codes that are changed to meet the building trades practices. In our community, there's over 3 dozen amendments in each one of these codes that will reflect the desires and needs of the electrical contractors, the plumbing contractors, and building contractors in our system. These codes are minimum codes. These are not the maximum code that we build by, but these are the stepping stones we start from as we do a plan review process and we actually build a construction building. Later on in the year, as you remember, we set up a special subcommittee for Chapter 17 within the structural tests and the structural inspections, and a special subcommittee was set up for each one of those areas in that Chapter 17. And some of that information was brought to you earlier on in some subcommittee meetings as well as some of your study sessions. Also of late, the Salina Home Builders Association asked us to review the Wichita model for residential foundations and compare that to the 2006 International Residential Code, which we did, and we hired a local structural engineer, to come in and help us review those codes and give us a recommendation. We met with the Building Advisory Board, some members from the Home Builders Association, and city staff about 5 or 6 times to review that proposal and came up with a one-size-fits-all foundation for our community for residential structures. It doesn't mean that that's the only structural foundation that we will work with in the community, but it gives them a guideline to use as far as this is your baseline that you can use for structural foundations. If you wish to go outside that and hire your own engineer to look through those codes and come up with a different design depending on the area of the community, then you'll have the right to do that. So any foundation that comes in or any residential permit that comes in, we will give them automatically our citywide structural design for a foundation. We feel like we've had input from multiple people. As I started calculating up, there was 40-some meetings, almost 50 meetings we put together on the codes here. We had at least 4 Building Advisory Board members at each one of the meetings. We had anywhere from 2 to 17 outside personnel who were there, either contractors, engineers, architects, who actually worked on the specific trade areas. This has not been an easy process. It's taken about 3.5 years to complete the 2006 codes. And these are on a 3-year code cycle, so the 2009 cycle is already out. Yes, we understand that. And the 2012 cycle is just about 1.5 years, almost 2 years away. As a matter of fact, if you'll ask the building official today, that he is already starting to work with the 2012 questions for the tests in 2012. So we know that we're about one code cycle behind, but we would like for you to consider today the adoption of the International Residential Code, the International Building Code, the International Fire Code, the Uniform Mechanical Code, and Uniform Plumbing Code, as well as the National Electric Code. And we will set this off on a 90-day process to where we will implement the codes in 90 days. During the period of the next 90 days, the design professional and the contractor can elect to use the existing 2003 codes, or they can elect to use the 2006 codes in their design. We will do a plan review process and comments on either one of the two codes. Today, we'd like for you to adopt the codes as amended to fit into Salina's City of Salina construction practices. Any technical questions, we can have the building official stand up and talk about. The fire marshal was just called out on a structure fire, so he is not here, but we believe the building official can answer any technical questions on any of the International Fire Code as well. We stand for questions.
Questions of staff? Certainly we appreciate your efforts in this daunting task.
I want to echo that as well, especially to all the citizens, the design professionals, and construction trade staff members that are just citizens like you and me, and they took time out of their busy schedules to get this done. If I did the math correctly, it was definitely over 100 hours worth of work, so I truly appreciate that.
The 100 hours is in meetings themselves.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
No questions? Okay. We're going to need each one of these ordinances. Motion will need to be made separately for each one of these.
I think that would be best, Mayor.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't know if that was a question or a
That
statement.
was just a... Okay.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve on first reading ordinance number 10-10-552, amending Chapter 8, Article 1, Division 1 of Salina Code, adopting the 2006 International Building Code and local amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt on first reading ordinance number 10-10-552. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve on first reading ordinance number 10-10-553, amending Chapter 8, Article 1, Division 2 of the Salina Code, adopting the 2006 International Residential Code and local amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt on first reading ordinance number 10-10-553. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve on first reading ordinance number 10-10-554, amending Chapter 8, Article 1, Division 3 of Salina Code, adopting the 2006 Uniform Plumbing Code and local amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt on first reading ordinance number 10-10-554. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve on first reading ordinance number 10-10-555, amending Chapter 8, Article 1, Division 4 of Salina Code, adopting the 2006 Uniform Mechanical Code and local amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt ordinance number 10-10-555. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve on first reading ordinance number 10-10-556, amending Chapter 8, Article 1, Division 5 of the Salina Code, adopting the 2005 National Electric Code and local amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt on first reading ordinance number 10-10-556. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve on first reading ordinance number 10-10-558, amending Chapter 14, Division 1, 2, and 3 of the Salina Code, adopting the 2006 International Fire Code and amendments.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt on first reading ordinance number 10-10-558. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0. Move on to administration.
Item 8.1, second reading ordinance number 10-10,557, amending Chapter 2, Article 4, Division 3 of the Salina Code pertaining to indemnification for liability.
This ordinance was passed on second reading on June 28th, and since that time, no comments have been received. Is there any comments today? Seeing none, I'll bring this back to the commission.
Mayor, I move we adopt ordinance number 10-10557 on second reading.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt ordinance number 10-10-557 on second reading. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Angel?
Aye.
Commissioner Arpke?
Aye.
Commissioner Jennings?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Mayor Peck.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 8.2, resolution number 10-6750, incorporating phased improvements to the Bicentennial Center in the 2010-2014 capital improvement program.
Mr. Perry.
Good afternoon. As we have presented to you in the study sessions of a couple of weeks ago, we have put together this 5-year identified but unfunded program of capital improvements to the Bicentennial Center. It is in the form of a resolution, and we're asking at this time that the commissioners approve this list, this resolution, which would then direct city staff to develop a workable funding strategy to be presented to the City Commission before proceeding with any of the items, with the conditions that the scope and features within each annual phase be approved before proceeding with the design of that phase, and require commission approval of final construction design and cost estimate before advertising each bid and project to be let for bids.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Perry? Seeing none, I'll bring this back to the commission.
I have to say that the way that this would appear to me is by voting to put these on our capital list, even though they're unfunded, means that we haven't identified a funding source. But we've completely bought off on the scope, albeit we can change that down the road. So many of these interfeed off of each other's that it's going to make it very hard, I feel, once it's put on the capital improvement list, and then once funding's identified for each phase. And actually funding has to be identified for all phases. Primarily, they're so interdependent. I think it'll be really hard to reverse the decision that we make today if we move to put it on. There's no doubt in my mind that there's a lot of maintenance that we've deferred to the facility. And if we were looking at, I added some up yesterday, if we were looking at a $2 million project for all of the maintenance that we've deferred over time, it would be very easy to say that's something that we need to do. We've put it off for a long time. But these 5 years not only include those items, but include a major overhaul on the inside and a major overhaul on the outside, with a changed direction of the facility fairly recent, and not a real ability to see if the changes that we implemented as a commission are going to take and move us into the right direction for the events and the conventions that we're going to do. And that's the issue that I have with it. I know I've heard a lot of the home analogies. If you don't do any work around your home for 25 years, you have to do it. But that addresses the maintenance. What we want to do aesthetically, inside and outside, are things that affect whether or not we're using the facility for the right things, or we've solely identified the way that we want to use the facility long term.
And I want to reiterate a little bit. I'm still a little bit uncomfortable, but would agree to putting it on identified but unfunded with, I think, some of the things we discussed, meaning just because we put this on identified but unfunded projects, we are in no way committing to the scope, to the start date, to the cost. You know, when we went through these 4 different areas, repairs and maintenance, code compliance, functional enhancement, and aesthetics, I wasn't even in agreement on how some of the different projects were being put into those separate areas. Some things may have been in functional enhancement, I thought were in aesthetics, and anyway, I just wasn't even in agreement with how those were all being identified. And with what Commissioner Jennings said, would also want to make sure that each year, each project is a completely independent project, that, well, we have to start year 2 because we've already done A, B, and C on year 1, and so we have to start year 2, otherwise we can't finish it. I think we need to make sure every single year, every project is completely independent of the other. And again, I would vote to put it on identified but unfunded just so that staff can go out and identify funding sources, because if we're going to move forward on this, we have to do it in a way that has very little impact on the taxpayers.
Just refresh my memory, and I don't know if this would be you, Jason, or Rod, France. How many other things do we have out there with a long, and I know I asked that question, but with us being off last week, I'm a little foggy. How many things do we have out there with a year or with a long, that we have on the identified but unfunded, that we have on a long-term CIP? Only one that comes to mind just right off the top of my head is the water plant. So, you know, just off the top of your head, I know we've put a lot of things in the past. In my term so far, we've put things, and I've seen things on the CIP identified but unfunded, and just wondered, are we adding
There's probably 15 to 20.
15 to 20 projects?
In your draft, your CIP that you have, yeah, we do have a lot. The identified but unfunded list is intended to be a bit of a conceptual list where we identify a project need, but you may or may not have a real defined project scope. And what it is, it's kind of a reserve area. Obviously, it's not out there for funding yet. Otherwise, it would fall into one of the 5 years in the plan. But what it says is that when there is a revenue source identified that you agree with and formally support, then it falls into the plan wherever that makes sense at the time. Sometimes it might be waiting for example, transportation funding from the state for a project if it's a highway project. Sometimes it may just simply be something that's unaffordable, but that's a need, and at some point, if we believe we have the ability to bond it and do it, then you feel as a governing body you can put it in there. But on pages 10 and 11, and you may not have it in front of you in your budget notebooks that were handed out. We've got a copy of that CIP, and on the back we have identified but unfunded towards the back of that. And yeah, we have, I'm just kind of counting real quick, 12, 14, 16 or so projects that are identified but unfunded. So it's a pretty common list. That's the beauty of it, is that it doesn't formally bind you to anything, and that's the purpose in this project. Is we recognize you have 5 years and 5 phases. We recognize that there are some of them are somewhat conceptual, some of them are more defined. It does vary from repair to aesthetic. And we recognize that while we hope the cost estimates are high, we don't know for sure. We might get design estimates later on a project that are actually higher, but we might get some that are lower and actual bids that are lower. We just simply don't know. But the idea is that we do look at each phase, and we certainly I can't guarantee that when we try to talk about them being independent that they will be, but we have an obligation as a staff that if there's a relationship to from one project to another, such as possibly HVAC or wiring that could disrupt wall areas, floor areas, that gets you into another project, that we identify those so that you recognize those as a governing body and then can make a conscious decision as to how those work together, and if you want to go with one project knowing that it could get you into another, whereas a parking lot project would be totally independent, or the skin of the building could be totally independent. So this allows us to in the next 5 years to start with phase 1. You might, right now phase 1 is shown as an estimate of about a little over $1.8 million. you might look at some of those things and say, you know what, it'd be nice, but let's hold back on those, and maybe it ends up being 1.4 million. That'll be determined when we really analyze phase one and the scoping and not just whether a project is in there, but actually to what degree you want to deal with that project. So that's what the governing body has the ability to do by simply putting it on identified but unfunded.
Okay.
So is it the request for a commitment to say that providing that we have the funding, we know that we need to put $10 million into the facility over the next few years?
No more than any other project on the list. Again, it's just putting it on the radar screen officially that says we know, it basically says we know we have a need. We agree there's a need. Not necessarily exactly what the need or the response to the need is, but when the resources are, when as a governing body you believe the resources are available to deal with the need, you look at it more specifically and you can scope it out at that time.
I guess, you know, if that's the paralysis in it, then part of it goes away. By that I mean, like, you know, the spending I can't remember what it was, but say $1 million to put a connecting corridor all around Heritage. My natural reaction would be, well, we've got to really show how we're going to pay that taxpayer money back to put that kind of money in there. And without knowing it, but putting it on a list that says, well, at some point in time we've discussed it through study sessions and I buy off on that, that's what I'm not comfortable with. You know, we need to see how we're going to use it, how's the frequency, is there going to be a payback, and if the comfort's there wherever that occurs, year two, to say we're going to pull that $1 million off of that, and now all of a sudden it's a $1.5 million project with the maintenance needed. Mm-hmm. then I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
I really want to reiterate that there's no scope to this that I feel that I'm in complete agreement on. We've been educated on a lot of the needs and where a lot of the needs are going to benefit the center, but we're not approving a scope of work here.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly what this action is. And not only are you not obligated by putting it on identified but unfunded, but in order to get obligated, you would first, assuming that there's agreement on the revenue source, you would have to take formal action to actually place it on, say, year one or year two or any aspect of this on a certain year of the CIP. And even when you have something on the CIP, you're not formally obligated. That's your kind of your plan, but you have the ability to say, well, we've decided not to do it, or funding didn't turn out the way we thought it would, or whatever. It doesn't really make a difference, because when we bond, you're obviously going to approve, we'd have you approve a final scope of a project, authorize us to go forward with that, the fees associated with it, if there are fees, the bonding authority for the project, actual bids. So there's many, many, many decisions that get you from identified but unfunded all the way into obligatory actions. You're pretty far from that. So, and the next step would be, if you do agree on a scope and all that, to actually place it in, or place some aspect into a year of the CIP. So that would be the next step for part of the project. So you really truly get the opportunity to dive as deeply and as detailed as you want to into any aspect of this. And if you want it to pay for itself, you could say, staff, go back and see if it'll pay for itself, and we'd either come back and say, well, it's a functionality issue. I don't know if it'll bring back the money, dollar for dollar, or it does bring back the money dollar for dollar, and then you could apply your values that you look at for this type of project and decide where you want to go as a governing body. But you get that full opportunity.
Okay.
When we get a zoning issue or a zoning request, we get the minutes from the zoning board meetings. I guess my fear is some future commission will feel like they're under some kind of added pressure if they're under the mistaken belief that this commission was fully supportive of everything contained in years 1 through 5 by putting it in the identified but unfunded projects. Would a future commission, when this comes back for approval or being moved to the CIP, receive the minutes from this meeting so they know that this commission wasn't?
That's a good point. I mean, the question is how does a future commission know that there wasn't a vote up or down on the scope?
Yeah. What you're talking about is an issue of trust. We could give them the minutes, but we could also explain what identified but unfunded is in the same way we did here.
And these minutes are taken differently
And
as
we
well.
would. And so then they get to make an independent decision as to what they want to do at that point in time.
Well, one comment I want to make is make sure that we don't have any additional deterioration on the facility we've already got. And if I just look at the repairs, maintenance, and code compliance, it's 77% of the first year's budget, but, in the second year, it's only a little over 30%. So, I'm well aware of, functional enhancements and aesthetics are important, but I'd really like to do the maintenance. I don't want to defer that any further. So I agree with the rest of the commission here that this is a huge step forward, and it is unfunded. But I would like to make sure that we do the maintenance that's necessary.
And we did put a $200,000 a year line into the budget for
Yes.
maintenance, right? So, I mean, when we're talking about toilets that need to be replaced because there's something newer, better out there, then that's one thing. But because they don't work, then we've increased the facility budget, so we're not going to go further downhill. So
Right.
I think we've definitely all voted to erase that problem quite a while ago.
Right.
Yeah,
Good.
absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, well, I think it's great. The scope and details can be finalized later, but certainly putting this on the identified but unfunded section of the CIP allows us to put a halt to, or at least the beginnings of putting a halt to 30 years of very little maintenance and neglect in some cases. So, are there any other questions or comments? Is there any public comment? If not, I'll bring this back to the commission.
Mayor, I move we adopt resolution number 10-6750.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt resolution number 10-6750. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 8.3, approve change order number 1 for the 2003 crack and joint ceiling project number 10-2789.
Mr. Stack, you got your calculator.
I'm prepared for questions, but I just was making sure calculations added up. We used quite a bit more crack seal this year than we had anticipated. And basically, our crack seal contractor did a really good job. And in the past, we've bid our crack seal basically per square yard of pavement. And this year, we just said, okay, how many pounds is it going to take? We're just going to estimate whatever pounds they put down, that's what we pay them for. So we feel like we got a better product that way. However, didn't go as far, and so we needed a little bit more material to finish some of the streets that we needed to finish. The contractor agreed to do that, and we're out on site, and we just kept going. So we felt like it was a worthwhile extension of the material to keep going and to keep filling cracks. Our streets are definitely in need of crack seal, and we estimate next year we might double this project just to even try and keep up, and it's just something that we need to do. So this is a request for some more crack seal and then an extension of time to this Friday. So they're pretty much finished up, but we just wanted to make sure that they got everything done by this Friday. We also sealed quite a few wide cracks on Ohio, and that's a pretty high profile road. You've probably driven it. Worked okay. There's some of those bumps were much better than they used to be. Some of them still aren't great. So it was a kind of a test case this year. The wide cracks are deep, and you can't use just the regular material. You have to actually use an asphalt material, and they used that and then squeegeed it out and filled up. It went along. Used a lot of material for that. So it's something that we feel like worked okay. Ohio might have been beyond the point of no return, but we feel like we've at least lengthened it out for another few years, and then we'll try and either mill and overlay it or microsurface it. But it should hold together for a while. We definitely have a lot of crack seal material out there, and it should definitely help us in potholes, and then we'll just continue to try and catch up each year. So I'll entertain questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Approximately 100,000 pounds of material and covered about 250 square yards, 250,000 square yards of streets. So just for your reference purposes, it was a large program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring this back to the commission.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve change order number 1 for the 2010 crack and joint seal, project number 10-2789, in the amount not to exceed $20,216.72.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve change order number 1 for project number 10-2789. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Item 8.4, approve the allocation of funds to local agencies for the 2010-2011 Kansas Emergency Shelter Grant Program.
Servant.
Mayor and Commissioners, this concerns an award made by the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation to the City of Salina for the purpose of helping those in need of housing that would be either without homes at all or to stay in homes that they occupy. The funds were smaller this year, but we also had applications from one fewer agency. So we essentially were given the same award as received last year for the same purposes, but the state chose not to fund one category, and that would be prevention. We do not really know why they didn't fund prevention, except we did get a large grant last year under the stimulus package for the purpose, a similar purpose. So it isn't that services have been decreased to the homeless in Salina, it's that we did not get as much money as we would like to have gotten for the emergency shelter grant. Essentially, the funds that came to us were divided equally among all the agencies. That's our proposal, and it's up to you to make that decision.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of staff?
Did I miss which agencies? Oh, I didn't
It's
see it
on-
the
it's on
back.
that detail
That's
sheet.
why. I didn't flip it all the way
Yeah,
over.
and it's Ashby House, Catholic Charities, DVAC, and Emergency Aid Food Bank.
Thank you.
Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring this back to the commission.
Mayor, I move that you authorize and sign the grant award notification and the finance director to sign the budget itemizations for each local agency for the 2010-11 Kansas Emergency Shelter Grant Program.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we authorize myself to sign the grant award notification and the finance director to sign budget itemizations for each local agency for the 2010-2011 Kansas Emergency Shelter Grant Program. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes 5-0.
Mayor, I move to recess into executive session for 30 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters subject to the attorney-client privilege for the reason that public discussion of those matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interest in the matters, and for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to non-elected city personnel for the reason that public discussion of the matter would violate the privacy rights of the non-elected personnel involved, and reconvene at 5:10 p.m.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we recess into executive session. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Do we expect any action?
No, we do not.
Okay. We are in executive session.
Paul would love that.
It's going to get organized and pitches.
Paul would love that.
I'm not entirely kidding.
We have